Opening the silent cost of deep awareness. They say you're too quiet, too intense, too much. You speak, and the room goes silent not because you're wrong, but because you're different. You notice what others don't. You question what others blindly accept. And slowly, people begin to drift away. You nod through the noise, laugh at jokes that feel hollow, and smile on cue. But deep down, you feel like a stranger among your own kind. You've done everything right, but something still feels wrong. And eventually, the question forms in the back of your mind, is it me? But what if the problem isn't you? What if society simply isn't built for minds like yours? Arthur Schopenhauer, the brutally honest German philosopher, believed that real intelligence, raw, reflective, unfiltered, isolates. Not because it's flawed, but because it pierces the illusions that comfort others. Most people don't want truth. They want certainty. They want simple. But you see too much to play along. This video is not another feel-good pep talk. It's a reckoning. A deep dive into the psychological exile of those who think too deeply, feel too much, and live on the edges of a world addicted to distraction. By the end, you might realize something radical. Your loneliness isn't a defect. It might be the clearest proof of your mind. Part 1, the intelligent child and the first taste of isolation. It begins quietly, not with rejection, not with trauma, but with a strange, wordless disconnection. You're a child, sitting in a classroom surrounded by kids your age. They laugh, they run, they talk with ease. But you sit still watching. Not because you're shy, not because you're scared, but because something feels off. You're not above them. You just don't feel with them. While they chase games and mimic jokes from television, your mind drifts toward questions they don't ask. Why do people pretend to be happy? Why does it feel like everyone is wearing a mask? Why do I see things others don't even seem to notice? This is not superiority. It's solitude. Most people misunderstand the loneliness of the intelligent. They imagine it's born from arrogance, from thinking you're better. But that's rarely true. The truly intelligent child isn't prideful, they're just quietly perplexed. They don't know why they feel different, only that they do. And so begins the first exile. Subtle, silent, emotional. You learn quickly that depth doesn't belong in casual conversations, that your questions are too heavy for the playground, that your silences confuse others. So you adapt. You smile when you're supposed to. You mimic what's expected. But inside, you're always somewhere else. Observing, analyzing, asking the questions no one else seems to care about. This isn't an act, it becomes survival. This early disconnect is not just anecdotal. Psychology now confirms what Schopenhauer sensed long ago. Deeply reflective children often develop what researchers call cognitive loneliness. It's not about lacking friends. It's about lacking resonance. Other children can talk, laugh, share toys, but they don't share your way of seeing. They don't get it. So you stop trying to explain. You begin to live in two worlds, the outer one, where you perform, and the inner one, where you exist. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." For many, this begins not in adulthood, but in childhood. The intelligent child starts to crave solitude, not because they hate people, but because it's the only space where they don't feel like an alien. In solitude, their thoughts are not dismissed as weird. In silence, their inner questions aren't punished. Solitude becomes sanctuary. And here's the tragedy. No one notices, because you behave well. You do what's expected. On the outside, you're just another student. But on the inside, you're already miles away. Already wondering if there's something wrong with you. Already starting to believe the myth that intelligence is cold, distant, difficult to love. But maybe it's not the intelligence that pushes others away. Maybe it's the hunger for truth, the resistance to pretend, the unwillingness to stay on the surface. That's what others can't sit with. And so the exile begins. Not with a bang, but with a silence no one else seems to hear. Part 2. Society doesn't hate intelligence, it fears truth. The world claims to admire intelligence. Schools reward it. Companies hire for it. Society creates myths around it: genius, innovation, brilliance. But what society truly celebrates is a specific type of intelligence, the kind that performs, that produces, that entertains. Not the kind that questions. Not the kind that disrupts. The moment intelligence turns its gaze inward towards society's hypocrisies, its contradictions, its false comforts, it becomes dangerous. This is what Schopenhauer saw with brutal clarity. He didn't romanticize intellect. He called it a curse. Not because thinking is painful, but because seeing too much isolates. Real intelligence doesn't just solve problems, it unmasks illusions. And illusions are what society clings to most. Think about it. When you ask, why do we do things this way? In a meeting, people don't lean in. They tense up. When you challenge the logic behind a family tradition, the room doesn't become curious. It grows cold. It's not because you're being cruel. It's because you're revealing something uncomfortable. Something fragile. Comfort is the true currency of the collective mind. And truth? It threatens that comfort. So society turns away. Not violently, but with a subtle, growing rejection. You're called too intense, too analytical, not a team player. You start noticing how quickly the room changes when you speak honestly. You're not attacking anyone. You're just not participating in the shared illusion. And that, more than anything, makes people uneasy. In psychology, this is known as truth aversion. People don't avoid reality because they're stupid. They avoid it because the brain is wired for stability. When a new truth destabilizes their worldview, even a small one, it's experienced not as information, but as threat. And when you are the one constantly presenting those truths, you become the threat. It's a strange paradox. The world quotes Einstein, but mocks the kid who talks like him. They share Schopenhauer's words, but roll their eyes at someone who actually lives by them. It's not that society hates intelligence. It's that it fears what intelligence reveals. This is why shallow intelligence, memorizable, marketable, polite, is accepted. But deep intelligence, the kind that questions identity, power, tradition, is marginalized. Because it doesn't flatter. It doesn't entertain. It doesn't keep things easy. It demands inner work. And that, most people are not ready for. You might wonder, if truth is so unwelcome, should I keep speaking it? Should I keep asking questions? Or should I stay quiet, blend in, pretend not to see? But silence comes with a cost, too. Because every time you swallow your thoughts, you lose a part of your voice. Every time you censor your questions, you dim your clarity. And the question begins to echo inside: is there a place in this world for people who refuse to pretend? Part 3: Herd instinct and the fear of independent minds. There's an invisible rule that governs every group, every classroom, every office. Don't think too much. Don't ask too many questions. Don't stray too far from what's already been said. And if you do, prepare to be punished not with violence, but with exile. That's the herd instinct in action. Schopenhauer understood this long before psychology gave it a name. To him, most people don't think independently because they were never taught how. They think socially. They think with the group. Their truths are borrowed. Their values inherited. Their identities constructed from what's expected, not what's examined. And when someone arrives who refuses that script, someone who speaks in their own voice, the herd grows restless. Not because this person is wrong, but because they make the others feel wrong. The truly intelligent disrupt the group's sense of certainty, and certainty is the lifeblood of belonging. History has proven this time and again. Socrates was sentenced to death, not for crimes, but for corrupting the youth. In truth, he corrupted comfort. He asked questions that made power feel exposed. Galileo was locked away for revealing the earth revolved around the sun, not because the church hated science, but because it hated contradiction. Tesla died alone, not because he lacked genius, but because he lacked compliance. The herd doesn't hate truth. It hates the tremor that truth causes. This is what makes independent thinkers so threatening. Not because they shout, but because they see. They notice inconsistencies others ignore. They question rituals others obey. And worst of all, they don't need the herd to validate their thoughts. That kind of freedom is radical. And to the group mind, it's intolerable. Modern psychology now confirms what Schopenhauer intuited. Human beings evolved in small tribes where conformity ensured survival. To belong was to live. To stand out meant danger. Our ancestors didn't ask, "Is this true?" They asked, "Will I be safe if I believe it?" That survival mechanism still lingers. It's why people instinctively defend tradition even when it no longer serves them. It's why we silence the dissenter before we understand them. And it explains why, when you start thinking differently, not rebelliously, but deeply, you become a mirror. Not everyone sees themselves in that mirror, but those who do often look away. Not because they hate what they see, but because they're not ready to change it. So what do you do when your clarity makes others uncomfortable? When your independence threatens the group's illusion of unity? You have two choices. You can betray your mind for acceptance, or you can honor your truth and risk standing alone. Schopenhauer believed the second path, though lonely, was more human. Because to surrender your thoughts is to surrender yourself. And once you've tasted the freedom of thinking for yourself, no herd, no matter how warm, will ever feel like home again. Part 4: Institutions that reward conformity and punish depth. We grow up hearing that intelligence is the key to success. We're told that schools exist to nurture minds, that workplaces value innovation, that social platforms are arenas for free thought. But what if that's only true on the surface? What if beneath the slogans and speeches, these institutions don't reward intelligence but obedience? Schopenhauer might argue that society has built a machine not to awaken the mind, but to regulate it. In schools, the quiet child who questions the curriculum is labeled difficult. The student who follows instructions and recites the textbook earns praise. The one who dares to ask why too often is told to stop being disruptive. It's not that their questions are wrong. It's that they challenge the rhythm of the system. In the workplace, it's no different. Companies post banners about creativity, agility, forward thinking. But in meetings, when someone points out a flaw in the process or questions an outdated norm, the reaction is rarely celebration. It's silence, a shift in energy, a subtle warning you're not playing the game. You're thinking too much. Even online, where platforms were supposed to democratize voice complexity, is punished. Nuance gets buried. Algorithms reward outrage, repetition, and simplicity. The deeper your thoughts, the fewer your clicks. Not because people are incapable of depth, but because the system is engineered for speed, not reflection. This is how modern institutions uphold the very dynamic Schopenhauer warned against. They shape people not to think, but to fit. They reward agreement over insight, performance over perception, style over substance. And those who can't pretend, those whose minds won't quiet down, begin to feel not just excluded, but defective. But let's pause here. What is the real danger of these systems? It's not just that they silence the intelligent. It's that they teach the intelligent to silence themselves. Over time, the child who once asked big questions learns to keep them inside. The adult who once saw through the noise learns to smile and nod. Not because they've changed, but because they've adapted. And that's the tragedy. Because when intelligence learns to self-censor, we don't just lose questions, we lose potential. We lose art. We lose invention. We lose truth. Schopenhauer wrote that talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. But in systems that punish the unseen, the genius never fires. The target remains invisible. The idea remains unspoken. So the question becomes, how many brilliant minds have gone silent? Not because they lacked courage, but because they were taught that their courage was inconvenient. And how many more will follow unless we begin to build spaces where truth is not just tolerated, but welcome? Part 5. The invisible cost of intelligence, cognitive loneliness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. It's not the absence of conversation that haunts you, it's the absence of connection. You talk, but your words hang in the air like foreign language. You listen, but the topics swirl around things that feel weightless. You laugh when you're supposed to, but deep down, you're somewhere else. And that somewhere is where no one else seems to go. This is not social awkwardness. It's not arrogance. It's something far more difficult to name: cognitive loneliness. A term psychologists now use to describe the experience of those who think differently, not just in speed or complexity, but in depth. For these minds, it's not enough to talk about the weather or the latest trend. They crave meaning, nuance, subtext. But our culture rarely makes room for that. A 2016 study in the British Journal of Psychology revealed something telling. The more intelligent a person is, the less satisfaction they report from frequent socializing. Why? Because for many, social interaction feels like shallow water. Refreshing for some, but suffocating for those who long to swim deep. The conversations don't nourish them. They deplete them. Schopenhauer understood this emotional fracture centuries ago. He knew that intelligence creates a gap. He wrote, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." In other words, the more you feel the mystery of life, the fewer people you can talk to about it. You begin to notice things others dismiss. You sense undercurrents in tone, body language, context. A single sentence can send your mind spinning for hours. You replay it, dissect it, not because you want to, but because you can't not. This is the mind that lives in layers. That sees 12 meanings where others see one. And that very sensitivity becomes a burden. It's the kind of loneliness that doesn't always show. You go to work. You attend dinner parties. You're polite, maybe even charming. But inside, there's a craving. A hunger to be seen, not just liked. A desire to be understood, not just acknowledged. And when that never comes, something quiet begins to erode inside. A soft fatigue. A slow questioning. Is there something wrong with me? Am I just too much? No, you're not too much. You're just in a world that often asks too little. The tragedy is not that intelligent people feel alone. The tragedy is that no one ever taught them that this loneliness is a signal, not a sickness. A signal that your mind is reaching for something real in a world addicted to performance. So if you've ever felt that silence behind your eyes while others talk, if you've ever wanted to scream in a room full of noise, it may not be because you're broken. It may be because your mind is still awake. Part 6, Evolutionary Misfits. Why Deep Thinkers Don't Fit In. What if your loneliness isn't just personal, it's biological? What if the modern world, with all its speed and noise, was never designed for the kind of mind you possess? This is not poetic metaphor. It's evolutionary mismatch. Dr. Thomas Suddendorf, a cognitive evolution expert, explains that our brains were shaped in tight tribal circles, groups of 100 to 150 people. In those early environments, success meant social harmony, acceptance, predictability. There was no reward for questioning too deeply, for standing out, for thinking differently. In fact, those things could get you cast out. And for most of human history, exile meant death. Now, fast forward to today. The world has changed, but our neural wiring hasn't caught up. The deep thinker, the overanalyzer, the pattern noticer, the one who senses things unsaid, is not dysfunctional. They are simply out of place. A mind designed for reflection, silence, and nuance now lives in a culture built on stimulation, distraction, and speed. That mismatch creates suffering. Imagine a brain built to notice the subtle, now flooded by noise. Imagine a soul built for contemplation, now suffocated by surface-level chatter. This is what it means to be an evolutionary misfit. The irony is, these very traits, depth, reflection, emotional intensity, once made a person a seer, a sage, a shaman. In ancient cultures, those who thought differently were given space, sometimes feared, but often revered. Now, they're diagnosed, pathologized, told they need to chill out, stop overthinking, or just go with the flow. But flow, for them, has never meant comfort. It has meant betrayal. To stop thinking is to stop being themselves. And so they live split lives, trying to function in a world that overwhelms them while hiding the world that lives inside them. Modern science is just beginning to understand this tension. Neurodiversity theories, overstimulation studies, high sensitivity research, they all point to a single truth. Some people feel more, process more, question more. And that more comes at a cost. Anxiety, fatigue, social exhaustion. Not because they are weak, but because they are saturated. Schopenhauer didn't have access to neuroscience, but he didn't need it. He saw that the more profound the intellect, the more it suffers in the noise of mediocrity. He called it the pain of clarity. And to him, it was not a disorder. It was a sign of consciousness that had outgrown the crowd. So what do you do if you find yourself in this space too deep for the shallow, too sensitive for the loud, too honest for the scripted? You stop asking the world to match you, and you start honoring the way you were made. Because the truth is, you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to see differently, to feel deeply, and in that very dissonance to carry the seeds of something more human, more real, more awake. Part 7, misunderstood as arrogant, the ego's defense against clarity. You walk into a room. You speak with calm, quiet clarity. You don't shout. You don't belittle. But still, something shifts. Eyes narrow. Smiles fade. And slowly, the room labels you arrogant, cold, thinks they're better than everyone. But the irony is, you never said that. You never even felt that. The projection doesn't come from you. It comes from them. Schopenhauer saw this long before modern psychology gave it a name. When intelligence speaks truth, it doesn't just present information, it awakens insecurity. And that insecurity lashes out. Not always with anger. Often with sarcasm, dismissal, avoidance. Because for many people, your clarity is not a gift. It's a mirror. One they didn't ask for. One they'd rather shatter than face. This is where the ego steps in. The ego is not evil, it's protective. It builds stories to keep the self intact. And when someone intelligent walks into a room and effortlessly reveals contradictions, when they question what others accept without blinking, the ego sounds the alarm. Not because the intelligent person attacked, but because their presence exposed. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less someone knows, the more confident they feel in what they know. Add a truly intelligent mind to that space, and suddenly, the illusion collapses. That collapse doesn't feel like education. It feels like threat. And the ego defends itself the only way it knows how. It resents the source. So you become a target. Not because you hurt anyone, but because your very existence destabilized their image of themselves. And the fastest way for someone to rebuild that image? Make you the problem. Dismiss your insight as arrogance, your intensity as coldness, your precision as pretension. This explains so much of the subtle rejection intelligent people face. Why you get left out of conversations. Why your ideas get labeled too much. Why people can't quite connect with you. It's not that you're antisocial. It's that your mind unintentionally challenges theirs. And in a world built on group harmony and ego protection, that's dangerous. The truly intelligent don't need to announce their brilliance. They often wish they could hide it. They simplify their speech, soften their voice, censor their questions. Not because they're ashamed, but because they've learned how fragile the social fabric is, and how easily it tears when truth gets too close. But here's the tragedy. The more you silence yourself to protect others, the more you lose connection with yourself. You start to wonder, maybe I should just play along. Maybe I really am too much. No, you are not too much. You are just more than some are ready for. Schopenhauer never pretended this was easy, but he believed that intelligence is not defined by applause. It's measured by how much truth you're willing to carry, even when it isolates you. And sometimes, the most misunderstood people are the most awake. Part 8. Loneliness is not a flaw, it's a signal. We've been taught to fear loneliness. We're told it's a sign that something is broken, that we failed to connect, that we're unlikable, too strange, too intense. But what if that isn't true? What if loneliness, for some minds, is not a flaw but a signal? Schopenhauer believed that suffering, especially the kind that comes from thinking too much and feeling too deeply, was not pathology. It was perception. And in a world built for distraction and simplicity, perception hurts. Not because you're wrong, but because you're awake. Loneliness is not always about being alone. It's about being unmatched. About looking across a sea of faces and seeing no one who mirrors what lives inside you. It's not the absence of company, it's the absence of resonance. And when you live in a world that rewards echo chambers and punishes nuance, resonance becomes rare. This loneliness doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, in the middle of a conversation where you feel invisible, in the silence after sharing something vulnerable, only to be met with awkward nods, in the aching after being called too much one more time, even though you were just being honest. But here's the truth that Schopenhauer offered: loneliness is the price of clarity. The deeper you think, the fewer people there are to meet you there. The further you walk into truth, the more others stay behind in comfort. And slowly, you begin to understand you are not failing to connect. You are simply standing in a different dimension of reality. Modern psychology backs this up. Research into gifted individuals, high sensitivity profiles, and neurodivergent cognition reveals the same pattern: isolation not as dysfunction, but as a byproduct of uncommon depth. When your mind reaches farther, faster, and deeper than most, loneliness isn't just likely. It's inevitable. And yet, within that inevitability, there is power. Because when you stop seeing loneliness as punishment, it transforms. It becomes a mirror, one that reflects not what you lack, but what you value. It shows you that your hunger for meaning is real, that your rejection of the superficial is not elitism, it's integrity, that your questions, even when unanswered, are sacred. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." Not because others are bad, but because most cannot hold the weight of what you carry. And in solitude, you are not diluted. You are distilled. So the next time the silence hurts, remember, it may not be emptiness. It may be space. Space for truth, for depth, for you. You're not broken for being lonely. You're being invited to become. Part 9. The beauty and tragedy of uncompromised intelligence. There's a quiet tragedy that unfolds in the life of the truly intelligent, not because they fail, but because they refuse to betray their mind. In a world addicted to ease, those who hold on to depth are not celebrated. They're sidelined. Because real intelligence, the kind that doesn't compromise, doesn't entertain. It confronts. It strips away illusions. And that makes it both beautiful and unbearable. You see it in history. The thinkers who saw too far, spoke too soon, felt too much. Alan Turing cracked the code that helped end a world war, only to be destroyed by the same society he saved. Simone Weil, the philosopher mystic, died young, unable to reconcile her hunger for truth with a world that fed on comfort. These were not failures. They were souls unwilling to perform intelligence in digestible doses. Schopenhauer understood this. He didn't glamorize intelligence. He called it a burden. He wrote of the noble intellect, not as a badge of superiority, but as a soul too honest to play along. And that honesty, over time, becomes a quiet rebellion. You stop laughing when you don't find it funny. You stop agreeing when something feels false. You stop performing and start standing still. But the cost is high. You begin to feel like a ghost in your own life. You attend the meetings. You show up at dinner. But something in you remains elsewhere, watching, not judging, just unspoken. You want to be known, not for what you do, but for how you see. But that rarely happens. Because people love the idea of intelligence, but not the discomfort it brings. Even in love, this pattern repeats. Intelligent souls are often praised for their insight, admired for their brilliance, but rarely understood for their inner world. The complexity that draws people in is the same complexity that drives them away. Because to love someone who sees too deeply is to be exposed. And so the intelligent often find themselves choosing, dull their mind to belong, or keep it sharp and walk alone. It's a cruel choice. But within that cruelty lies something sacred. Because every time you choose not to pretend, you are choosing yourself. Every time you speak the inconvenient truth, you are protecting something real. And that is the beauty in the tragedy. The cost is isolation. The reward is authenticity. Schopenhauer would say, if you feel misunderstood, rejected, cast aside, it's not proof that you're wrong. It may be the clearest sign that you're awake, that you've chosen not to barter truth for approval, that you've refused to turn your mind into a mirror for others' comfort. In the end, intelligence that never compromises is not just lonely, it's luminous. Not because it shines brighter, but because it refuses to go dim just to make others feel at ease. Part 10, you're not too much. You're just awake. If you've ever sat in a room full of people and felt like the only one not asleep, this was for you. If you've ever been told you think too much, feel too deeply, ask too many questions, this is your reminder. You are not too much. You are just awake. And being awake in a sleeping world will always feel like isolation at first. Schopenhauer never promised happiness. He offered something harder, but more honest dignity. He believed that a clear mind, no matter how painful, is more human than a comfortable illusion. That solitude, though heavy, is not exile, it's space. The space where your thoughts can stretch without shame, where your depth isn't a problem to fix, but a mystery to honor. Modern culture tells you to be less curious, less sensitive, less intense. It celebrates sameness, quick answers, agreeable smiles. But you are not here to be less. You are here to remember that your silence isn't emptiness, it's intelligence searching for resonance. That your loneliness isn't proof of failure, it's proof of uncommon clarity. And here's the truth few will say out loud. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone is meant to. But that doesn't make you broken. It makes you rare. You were never meant to fit into systems designed for obedience. You were meant to question them. You were never meant to smile at illusions. You were meant to name them. And you were never meant to dim your light for the comfort of others. You were meant to shine regardless of who stays. Schopenhauer once wrote, "Great men are like eagles and build their nest on some lofty solitude. Not because they hate others, but because they need silence to see clearly." You don't need everyone. You need space. You need truth. You need one real connection, sometimes just with yourself. And maybe, just maybe, if more minds like yours stopped apologizing for their depth, the world would remember how to feel again, how to think again, how to see again. So if you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer. You're part of something rare, a quiet community of souls who refuse to live on the surface, who are no longer willing to trade their authenticity for approval. And that, in a world built on illusion, is a radical act of courage. Don't shrink. Don't simplify. Don't wait to be understood before you live fully. You are not too intense, not too complicated, not too much. You are simply awake. And one day, when someone else finally looks at you, not with fear, but with recognition, you'll know you were never alone. You were just ahead of your time,